Today's webinar will be on the green building ordinance for the city of Delray Beach. The bottom line here is that we are looking for input for future reevaluation of the ordinance. We'll talk more about that as we go forward, but thought that it would be important to take a look at the history of what we went through. There is more than a decade worth of work that has gone into this. So reviewing how we got to where we are and also talking about the ordinance that we have in place right now before we open it up for questions to help give guidance for where we go in the future. So we're going to talk about the foundation, beginning background steps that we went through in the process, have a good history there, the stakeholders and participants that were involved, and also comments and revisions that we made in the ordinance, because that was really a very important part, and it made for a better ordinance. I am the sustainability officer for the city of Delray Beach, and so from a sustainability and resilience standpoint, green buildings are important because the built environment is responsible for 44% of emissions in the city of Delray Beach. And Chris is going to get into more of the detail on that data, but the city has adopted a resolution with goals of reducing emissions by 50% by 2030 and net zero by 2050. So we really have to find ways to reduce our emissions with buildings, if we're going to hit those goals. And from a sustainability standpoint, again, the importance of reducing greenhouse gases is related to climate change. Climate change is real. It's not something that is impossible for us to address. We do need to take action, and we need to have very clear strategies to address, and the green building ordinance and associated kind of steps are important strategies for addressing climate change. So the background for our green building ordinance goes back to 2009. There was a green task force that formed. These were citizens in the city of Delray Beach. They formed as a citizen group. There was support from the city in their meetings. They wrote an extensive report, and one of the recommendations in that report was a green building ordinance. In February of 2015, the first city green building ordinance was passed, and the provisions in that were applied to the central business district, had a requirement for LEED Silver or equivalent certification level, and it applied only to buildings of 50,000 square feet or larger. In 2019, the Green Implementation Advancement Board recommended an ordinance revision to the commission. Some of the recommendations there were applied to buildings of 5,000 square feet and larger, and for a LEED Gold or equivalent certification. A presentation was made to commission, and commission supported that and gave direction to staff to develop the ordinance. I came on board in May of 2020, and this was one of the first projects that I started to work on. And in February of 2020, the city comprehensive plan revision was adopted. And if you read through that excellent document, there are dozens of goals, policies, and objectives that refer to green buildings or components that are consistent with green buildings. So staff did write up the draft, and in February to May of 2021, we began doing public briefings. There were 7 meetings overall and 6 boards, all of whom supported either as the ordinance was written or with comments were in support of the green building ordinance. Some of the comments that came from those boards related to application to single family residences and smaller developments. So addressing the square footage, really, suggestion of lowering the certification level from that gold or equivalent, and got a lot of suggestions for incentives. Why, rather than making it a requirement, can't there be incentives that encourage or encourage higher level of certification? There was one presentation at which there was not support for the ordinance, and that was the Downtown Development Authority. And there were, I think, unanimous comments that this was not to say that they were against green buildings. It was that they did not support the ordinance amendment as written. There was a very clear statement that they recognized that there was benefit to green buildings. So it really is how the ordinance is designed. That was the important feature. And they mentioned square footage, so suggested that should be raised, phasing in the requirements to give time for construction and development industry to adjust, and also said that there was need for more stakeholder input, and all of those are really great suggestions. That really was a hallmark of the process. The comments that were received were really a benefit to where we wound up. So with the city process, as it was, though we went through the process and heard those comments, there was not change to the language that was in the ordinance. First reading was in July, and then second reading of August 2021. And it was at that point that the commission and public input really was clear that changes needed to be made to the ordinance, and the commission gave direction to gather input and come back to the commission. So in October, there was an outreach meeting that was very well attended, and the comments that were received were the same, basically, that were obtained during the other public comments. The cost of a certified building compared to a uncertified, how much cost was added on by the certification process, single family homes and smaller developments, also historical buildings, suggestion to raise the square footage threshold, and the specific comments really focused on that 15,000 to 20,000 square feet, lower certification level. There were lots of questions about the equivalency because the language in the ordinance was lead or equivalent. And so what did that equivalency mean? And also that tiers could be built into the green building ordinance, and continued suggestions for incentives. So in December, we gave an update presentation, and the commission comments voiced concerns about staffing and permit processing time. Again, all of these are very, very valid comments. There were concerns about materials cost. We were in the middle of the pandemic at that point. So it really is amazing that we were making progress on a green building ordinance, even in the middle of what were some very significant supply chain issues. Suggestion for future effective date, that's a component of phasing in, so that development would have a period of time to address funding and planning and design requirements. A very good item. And but overall, the commission was in favor with continuing, and staff did that. January to March, there were outreach to specific entities in the development community of Delray Beach. And in March of 2022, we arranged for a hybrid outreach event where we were very lucky to have presentations made by representatives of the Florida Green Building Coalition and the National Green Building Standard. Actually had representatives from the executive level at those two certifying entities, and also had a certifier from South Florida, a practicing certifier for those. So had good presentations, and had participation from the development community. And really the bottom line that came out of that is the lead can be a very difficult process to get through. There were options available through the ordinance, specifically these two programs that were much easier to get through, that still had tremendous benefit um, for towards sustainability, and especially at the lower levels of certification, definitely the certified LEED level, and even at the silver level, there was really minimal difference in cost between a uncertified and certified building. So in July, a update was presented to commission, and again, there was support, and we went to first reading in October, second reading in November, and ultimately the draft ordinance that did entail changes from the one that went before them first was passed 5-0. So the features in the ordinance that is in place right now, 4 green building certifications are specifically cited. That's NGBS and FGBC, as I mentioned, but also Green Globes and LEED, of course, the language is LEED, and it mentions the other 3 also. There is a tiering in the ordinance. There's a minimal level of certification required for buildings of all types throughout the whole city, 15,000 square feet up to 50,000 square feet. A silver level or equivalent throughout the city is required for buildings of 50,000 square feet and larger. The ordinance does not apply to historic buildings and many renovations. Historic buildings, just by their nature of preserving the material, are sustainable. I mean, if you reuse or use what is in place, then that is a savings of materials and greenhouse gases right there. Plus, there are a lot of restrictions on historic buildings already. And then with many renovations, that is a level of complication. So it did make sense. Renovations of only 15,000 square feet are greater is what would be covered. But an opportunity for us to address in the future, maybe. The effective date for the ordinance was November 1st of 2023, so that gave a year after the vote before the ordinance went into place, and there was a provision for reevaluation starting November 2024, which is a year after it went into effect. And the ordinance does apply to city projects, puts a little more detail on that requirement than what is already in Florida statute. That 255-2575 requires that governmental buildings get a certification, but the city ordinance would just provide a little bit more detail for our city projects. So what are the effects that our ordinance has? It applies to the whole city. There is a new tier for that 15,000 to 50,000 square feet, and overall this will lead to an increase in number of green buildings and provides a good starting point for us going forward. There is no increase in processing time for the permits because really we're relying on the third-party certification, and we're reviewing to make sure that occurs and the documentation is provided, but it is a pretty straightforward step for the city to review. This is a good example, and I have gotten, a couple of dozen inquiries from other cities, have made presentations to their boards. I actually just received an email this week. People and other municipalities are very interested in what's going on in Delray Beach, and I think that we can be glad that we are leading in this. And the provision for reevaluation. There were some comments that were not addressed in the ordinance that passed, things like being EV and solar ready. I mean, there was a statute that was passed preempting EV, so there's some problems from the state in that, and there is some more detail in ordinance that would be required. So these are potential things that, even though they were commented on before, we could address in reevaluation. Incentives, again, is an area, and we have talked to some of the builders associations that had some ideas on that. And it really gives us an opportunity in the reevaluation to do outreach like this, to go back through some of the steps that were very successful for us in passing the green building ordinance that we did, and get input from the community and buy-in as we are considering what we can do next to improve this. So from the sustainability standpoint, as we are heading towards the Q&A and comment section here, just want to say again that greenhouse gases are a main focus for sustainability. We do need to make progress on that, and so we're especially interested in what kinds of things could we do that would reduce greenhouse gases. And with that, Chris is going to talk a little more.
All right. Hello, everybody. So as Kent mentioned, we had a greenhouse gas inventory completed for the city in 2022, which shows that 96% of our emissions come from transportation and buildings making up about 44% of that. The difference here is that, and what makes a green building ordinance so important, is that people get a new car every couple of years, and that technology changes fast. And, we're talking about reducing greenhouse gases by 50% and 100% in subsequent decades. But the thing with buildings is that when we're talking about net zero by 2050, 75% of those buildings already exist. So, we have the technology to build better now, and that's what we should be doing. So this kind of puts it into perspective as to, where we're really generating our greenhouse gases and where it shows us where we should be focusing. Next slide. All right. Oh, yeah, there you go. All right. As mentioned before, 500,000 tons annually of CO2 equivalents emitted. So, it's a pretty hefty amount. There's a lot of work in front of us. And, all of these green building credits listed here can all really be tied back to reduction in greenhouse gases. Electricity and water, kind of obvious. Location and transportation. Location is, connection to existing infrastructure, existing transportation lines, things to cut down on traffic. Transportation, like I said, just changing out the fleets and the cars, that just kind of happens over time. Materials, like Kent said, tearing a building down versus using raw materials saves all of that embodied carbon. That is, harvesting, transporting to the manufacturing, having it manufactured, transporting it to the warehouses, all those things add up to the embodied carbon within those materials. So by using less materials, we can, reduce that embodied carbon as well. And then all these things really kind of contribute to the health of the building and the health of the occupants. Next slide. Again, the city of Delray Beach has adopted a resolution to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in the city by 50% by 2030 and 100% by 2050. Again, I think it's worth mentioning again, 100%, we're talking 75% of the buildings we're talking about already exist. And most cities, it says many here, but most cities and organizations are really not on track to hit these goals. I think some of that is just previous years and decades of, the technology not necessarily being, as widely available, but, we're at a point now where all of the innovation we need to build, really net zero buildings, it exists today. So trying to make these steps and to achieve these goals, a green building ordinance is a big piece of the puzzle. Next slide. And as part of our total outreach for our climate action plan that we are drafting, got this survey out. We've had it out for a couple months now. We're going to have it out for a bit. Our target is a minimum of 300 responses. We are at 272 as of today. So if everybody on here hasn't already taken this survey, please see the link below in the QR code and share with your friends. But our climate action plan is busted up into these 6 major categories. The survey follows these categories and really tries to elicit some input into what does the community think is the most important. How do you want to see the city approach our full climate action plan? Obviously, the green building really does contribute to all of these things, in one way or another. I think that might be the last one. Is there one more slides, Kent?
Before we go to the Q&A session, just want to reiterate what Chris said there and tie together. The Green Building Ordinance is a major strategy that can be used for reduction of greenhouse gases. And the survey questions in these 6 categories really are, it starts off, do you think that this is important, first of all? And then it lists a group of strategies and ask which of these do you think are important. So green buildings are a part of that, and we're really looking to take this information and we're going to summarize it and go back to commission, and hopefully we'll get direction on what things to work on. Obviously, the green building ordinance we expect to be a major part of that, but all of these different strategies are going to tie in together in our climate action plan. Greenhouse gas reduction is a huge part of that, but there's also preparation for the effects of climate change, because we are seeing heavier rainfall events and stronger storms and more heat. So the survey will be a guiding light for us, and really encourage you to take it like Chris said and share it. Also be very helpful to us. And with that, we really appreciate everybody being on.